The theater always felt busiest in the early morning, long before any audience arrived. The lights were half on, the hallways quiet, and the air carried the soft smell of dust mixed with fresh paint. In those hours, the building felt almost peaceful, like it belonged to only one person. And in many ways, it did. The single dad who worked there arrived earlier than anyone else, pushing open the back door with the same quiet routine every day. He never complained about the hours, even though they were tiring. He simply took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the old backpack he carried everywhere, and stepped inside. His job was simple on paper: clean the stage, arrange chairs, sweep the backstage area, and make sure props were set in the right place. But for him, it was more than just work. It was a way to keep life steady for his daughter. Every paycheck, every shift, every early morning made things a little easier for them at home. That thought alone kept him moving, even when fatigue weighed on his shoulders. He walked across the empty stage, listening to how each footstep echoed against the walls. The wooden floorboards were cool to the touch as he knelt down to pick up bits of glitter and tape left from the previous night's rehearsal. He worked carefully, not because anyone was watching, but because he wanted to do his job right. Even though most people in the building barely noticed him, he believed work should be done with honesty, even if it felt invisible. A few crew members passed by, chatting loudly about the upcoming talent show. Some nodded at him out of habit. Others walked past without even making eye contact. He didn't mind. He had grown used to blending into the background, like part of the theater's furniture. People were always busy with their own dreams and worries, and he didn't expect any special attention. His focus stayed on the broom in his hands, the cloth tucked into his belt, and the checklist he silently repeated in his mind. Still, there were moments small, fleeting moments when he paused near the piano standing at the center of the stage. It wasn't a fancy one, just an older instrument with faded edges and a few scratches. But every time he walked by, he felt something tug inside him, like an old memory trying to surface. He would brush dust off the top of it, straighten the sheet music stand, then walk away quickly before he got lost in thoughts he had tried for years to ignore. Most people didn't know that he used to play, not just casually, but deeply, passionately, the way someone breathes. Long before life changed, long before he had to carry responsibilities heavier than any instrument, music had been his world. But now, he told himself it was better to leave that part of his life in the past. Time had moved on, and he had to move with it. He pushed the mop bucket toward the edge of the stage, humming softly under his breath without realizing it. His voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper. If someone stood right beside him, they might have recognized the tune as an old melody he once composed years ago. But no one listened closely enough. The world around him was always busy, always rushing God as he worked. The theater slowly began to wake up. Performers arrived with bright outfits, large bags, and louder voices. They practiced lines, stretched their arms, and sang warm-up notes. He smiled politely whenever someone walked past him, though most of them didn't look long enough to smile back. They were excited about the talent show, hoping to impress the judges and maybe even get discovered by someone important. Meanwhile, he stayed in the background, adjusting chairs and clearing crumbs from the dressing room's dot at one point. A group of young performers rehearsed a dance routine on stage. Their music blasted through the speakers, shaking the floor. He stepped aside and waited, watching them twirl and laugh. He admired their confidence. They had no idea how much courage it took to stand in front of a crowd and perform with your whole heart. He knew that feeling intimately, though no one around him could guess. When their rehearsal ended, the stage was left messy with glitter, feathers, and pieces of tape. He quietly moved in with his broom, sweeping everything into neat little piles. A few performers thanked him without looking up from their phones, and he nodded back with a gentle smile. He didn't need attention, but simple respect always felt nice. Once the stage cleared, he focused on organizing the props table. He checked each item carefully: fake flowers, plastic cups, a stack of hats, a wooden cane for a comedy act. Everything had its place, and he knew exactly where each item belonged. Some people underestimated him because of his job, but he carried a sharp memory and a disciplined mind. Years of balancing work, bills, and raising a child alone had taught him to be organized. There was no room for mistakes when life depended on your carefulness. As he continued working, he thought about his daughter. She would be at school by now, probably drawing pictures on the corner of her notebook, like she always did. She loved art, music, and anything creative. She also loved hearing stories about his past, especially the time when music filled their home every day. Though he rarely played now, she still begged him to show her the pieces he once composed. He always made excuses: maybe another day, I'm too tired, or we'll see on the weekend. But deep down, he avoided the piano because it brought back memories of a life he could no longer live. Even so, the love for music never truly disappeared. It lingered quietly, like a shadow he learned to live with. Sometimes, when he found a quiet corner in the house after his daughter fell asleep, he would tap melodies on the table with his fingers. The rhythm soothed him, reminding him of something warm and familiar. But he never dared to sit at a real piano again. After finishing his morning tasks, he took a short break on the edge of the stage. He drank water from a simple metal bottle and looked out at the empty seats. He imagined how different life had felt back when he used to sit behind a piano, playing for small gatherings. People used to clap, cheer, and ask him to play more. That applause had once been fuel for his dreams. But applause couldn't raise a child or pay rent, so he traded dreams for responsibilities without hesitation. Still, sitting there in the silence, he felt a soft ache in his heart. Not regret, just a quiet longing, the kind a person doesn't talk about because it feels too delicate. He wondered what life might have looked like if things had gone differently. Then he shook the thought away. He had no room for what-ifs. His daughter was his world, and every sacrifice he made had led to her being safe, healthy, and loved. A voice suddenly echoed from the hallway, calling for help with a small spill near the dressing rooms. He quickly stood, grabbed his cleaning cloth, and hurried off to assist. This was his routine, and he handled it with quiet dignity. He didn't need the world to see how hard he worked. He just needed to keep going. When he returned to the stage later, the lights had warmed up, casting a soft glow across the floor. The piano sat exactly where it always did, waiting silently. He paused near it again, feeling that familiar tug. He placed his hand gently on the edge of the instrument, almost as if greeting an old friend. A simple touch was all he allowed himself, nothing more. Little did he know, life was quietly preparing a moment that would change everything for him. A moment where he would no longer be invisible, no longer just the man sweeping the floor. But for now, he simply continued with his work, unaware that the stage he was cleaning would soon become the place where his hidden world came to light. Long before he found himself sweeping stages and fixing props, life had looked very different for the single dad. Music had once been at the center of everything he did. Back then, he didn't need an alarm to wake him up in the morning. His excitement to play the piano was enough. His hands rested on the keys the way a bird rests on a familiar branch, gentle yet certain. Every note he played felt like it belonged to him and him alone. People who heard him perform said his music carried feeling, the kind that reached a person's heart before they even knew what was happening. In those days, he used to spend hours practicing in a small apartment with thin walls. The neighbors didn't mind. Some even opened their windows just to hear him better. He took small gigs at community centers, school events, and little gatherings where people clapped not because he was famous, but because they felt something from what he played. He didn't dream of luxury or fame. All he wanted was to share whatever lived inside his music. But life, as unpredictable as it is, shifted in ways he never expected. Around the time his daughter was born, he promised himself that music would always be part of her life. He imagined teaching her how to press the keys softly at first, then stronger, until she formed her own melody. Those early years were filled with laughter, warm blankets, baby toys on the piano bench, and tiny feet tapping the pedals even though they couldn't reach properly. He remembered the day he played a lullaby for her when she cried endlessly during a storm. The moment the melody filled the room, her tears slowed, then stopped. She fell asleep on his shoulder while he played with one hand. He had never felt a connection as deep as that moment. It made every struggle feel worth it. But happiness can be fragile. When his partner fell seriously ill, everything changed faster than he could understand. Days turned into hospital visits, endless paperwork, and long nights near a bed where machines beeped steadily. He tried to stay strong for his daughter and for the person he loved. He played soft music at the bedside, hoping it would bring comfort, but even music couldn't stop what was coming. Losing someone leaves an empty space nothing can fully replace. He carried that loss quietly, not talking much about it with anyone. The world around him kept moving as if nothing had happened, while he struggled to find pieces of himself that still felt whole. His daughter was too young to understand everything, but she understood enough to cling to him, her small hands wrapping around his shirt whenever he picked her up. She became the center of his world, the reason he kept pushing forward. After that, bills piled up faster than he could manage. Music work was unpredictable. Some months were good, others were painfully slow. He needed stability for his daughter, something steady that didn't depend on chance or crowds. So he took whatever job he could find. Cleaning at the theater wasn't glamorous, but it was steady and honest. It gave him enough to pay rent, buy food, and keep his daughter safe. That was all that mattered. Giving up music wasn't a decision he made in one day. It happened slowly, like a candle burning out little by little. At first, he told himself he was just taking a break. Then the piano keys at home collected dust. Weeks passed. Months passed. When he finally sat down to play again, his emotions overwhelmed him so strongly that he had to walk away before he even pressed a single key. It reminded him too much of everything he had lost, but his daughter never stopped being curious. She would sit beside him, swing her feet, and ask, "Can you play the song from the day I was born?" She remembered fragments of melodies, even though she had been too young at the time. Children have a strange way of keeping memories others think they've forgotten. He would smile, pat her head, and promise, one day. He didn't know when that day would come. He didn't tell her how much he missed the piano. He didn't tell her that sometimes, late at night, he would open the lid gently and look at the keys without touching them. He didn't tell her that he still composed melodies in his mind while walking to work. Some things were too tender to put into words. The theater job was supposed to be temporary. Just a few months, he thought. But months turned into years. The staff got used to him always being there, quiet, reliable, never causing trouble. They liked him, but they saw him only as the person who tidied the stage, not someone with a past filled with music. He sometimes overheard performers complaining about nerves before going on stage. He wanted to tell them it was normal to feel scared, that fear was part of performing, and that emotion was what made music real. But he never said anything. He didn't want to sound like someone who thought he knew more. They had their dreams. He had his responsibilities. Still, there were moments when something inside him stirred. Sometimes during rehearsals, the piano player would hit a note slightly off key, and he would wince silently because he knew exactly how it should sound. Other days, Someone played a piece he used to perform years ago, and he found himself humming along before he realized it. He always stopped quickly, looking around to make sure no one heard him. There were also memories he tried not to think about too often. Memories of his partner, smiling at him from the front row, eyes full of pride. Memories of his daughter, bouncing with excitement when he let her press the final note of a song. Memories of him practicing late at night, the world outside quiet, while someone he loved leaned against the doorway, listening with soft eyes. Life had pushed him into a different chapter, but that old chapter still lived inside him. It didn't disappear. It simply waited. One evening, after another long shift at the theater, he came home to find his daughter sitting at the table with a drawing. She held it up proudly the moment he walked in. It was a picture of a big stage with a piano in the middle and a man playing it. The man looked a bit like him. She had drawn his hair color, his old sweater, even the way he leaned slightly when concentrating. "Is this me?" he asked with a quiet laugh. She nodded. "This is you when you become brave again." She said it with such innocence that he didn't know what to say. He sat beside her, pulling her close, and looked at her drawing for a long time. Children had a way of saying the simplest things that held the deepest truth. He wasn't sure if bravery was the right word. Maybe it was. Maybe he had been hiding from his own heart for too long. He tucked the drawing carefully into a drawer, afraid it would get ruined. Even though he never said it out loud, that drawing became something precious to him. On days when he felt too tired or worried, he took a moment to look at it. It reminded him that someone still believed in him, not because of his job, not because of what he used to be, but simply because she loved him. As time passed, the quiet pull he felt toward the piano grew stronger. He tried to ignore it at work, especially when he passed by the old instrument on stage. But it kept calling him in small ways. Sometimes, when he wiped dust from the top, he would feel a small vibration inside, like a heartbeat he had forgotten belonged to him. One afternoon, during his break, he sat in the empty theater again. He looked at the piano across the stage and felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic, just a gentle realization that maybe music didn't have to be something he abandoned forever. Maybe it was allowed to exist in his life again, even if only in small moments. But he still hesitated. He didn't know if he could play the same way anymore. He didn't know if his fingers still remembered. And he didn't want to disappoint himself or reopen emotions he had worked so hard to manage. Still, the thought of playing again stayed with him. It stayed when he walked home in the evening. It stayed when he cooked dinner and listened to his daughter talk about her day. It stayed when he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling long after the lights were off. He didn't know it yet, but life was slowly leading him back to the thing he thought he had lost forever. Piece by piece, moment by moment, the world was arranging itself quietly behind the scenes. And soon, a single, unexpected moment would push his past and present together in a way he never could have predicted. For now, he simply continued living the only way he knew, how one day, one shift, one quiet thought at a time, without realizing that everything was building toward the day when he would finally sit down at the piano again. The morning of the rehearsal started like any other, but there was something in the air that felt slightly different, though he couldn't quite name it. Maybe it was the way the sunlight filtered through the tall windows, softer than usual. Maybe it was the mood of the people rushing around backstage. Or maybe it was just him tired, thoughtful, and carrying a quiet heaviness he'd been trying to ignore. He arrived early, as he always did, pushing the back door open with one hand while holding his old backpack in the other. The theater was still half asleep. Only a few lights were on, casting long shadows across the empty seats. The silence inside felt almost calming, like the building itself was taking a deep breath before the busy day began. He went straight to the stage. Sweeping, dusting, and checking props with the same steady routine. A few crew members walked past him with quick nods. They looked rushed, carrying clipboards and wearing headsets. They barely noticed him, but he was used to that. He didn't work for attention. He worked because he had responsibilities waiting for him at home. As he moved around the stage, he found himself glancing at the old piano again. It sat quietly in the center, its black surface catching small patches of light. He tried not to look for too long. The last thing he wanted was to get lost in thoughts that pulled him away from work. He whispered to himself, "Just focus," a reminder he had repeated many times over the years. Soon, the building started filling with noise. Performers trickled in, chatting loudly, some still half asleep but excited for the day. They carried large bags filled with makeup, clothes, and props. Many practiced lines or vocal warm-ups while walking, not minding the people around them. He watched them rehearse from a distance as he continued his tasks. One group practiced a dance routine, their footsteps pounding the stage in rhythm. A singer stood near the piano, trying to memorize lyrics while checking her phone every few seconds. A pair of jugglers dropped their props repeatedly and laughed each time. He blended into the background, moving quietly from one corner to the next, sweeping, cleaning, straightening chairs. He didn't expect anyone to speak to him, and most didn't. To them, he was simply part of the place. Like the curtains or the lighting fixtures. It wasn't until late morning that something unexpected happened. A performer had been practicing a dramatic scene involving a cup of fake tea. She was supposed to spill it as part of the act, but in her enthusiasm, she knocked it too hard. The cup bounced, rolled, and sent real liquid, not the safe stage kind spreading across the wooden floor. People gasped. Someone shouted, "Get a towel. We can't let this stain right before the judges arrive." Without hesitation, he rushed forward carrying a cloth and a mop he always kept nearby. He knelt, wiping the spill carefully, while others stepped back to avoid slipping. "Sorry," the performer said quickly before running off to continue her lines. He didn't mind. Accidents happened all the time in a busy theater. Cleaning them up was just part of his day. When he finished, he stood up, stretching his back a little. He glanced toward the piano. It was right there, closer than usual because of where the spill had landed. He walked over to dust off a few fingerprints left by performers who had passed by to do that. He had to move the piano cover, which had shifted slightly. When he lifted it, his fingers brushed against the keys. A single note escaped. It was soft, accidental, but pure. The kind of note that lingered in the air for a moment, longer than expected. He froze. His hand rested on the edge of the keys, and a strange feeling washed over him, familiar yet distant. Like meeting someone you loved deeply, but hadn't seen in years. He looked around quickly, anxious that someone might have noticed. A few performers were busy practicing. A crew member was adjusting lights. No one seemed to be paying attention. His heart beat a little faster. He told himself it didn't mean anything. It was just one note. Anyone could hit a random key. Still, it felt like something inside him had woken up. He took a step back, wiping his palms on his work pants. He didn't want to stand too close to the piano. It felt dangerous in an emotional way, as if the instrument might pull him into a world he wasn't ready for. He turned away and went back to organizing props, trying to distract himself. But for the rest of the hour, the memory of that single note stayed with him, repeating quietly in his mind. He hadn't touched a piano in so long that even one sound felt like a warm breeze breaking through a cold room. Later, when most performers stepped out for a short break, he remained on stage to tidy up. The theater finally quieted again. He heard footsteps fade down the hallway until he was alone. The silence returned. He stood near the piano without intending to. It was as if his feet had taken him there on their own. He stared at the instrument, feeling a mix of longing and fear. He sat down not fully, just enough to rest his hands on his knees. He didn't plan to play. He only wanted a moment to breathe. He looked at the keys, each one familiar yet intimidating. He lifted his hand and placed a finger gently on one of them. Not enough to press it, just enough to feel the smooth surface. He whispered to himself, "You're just touching it. Nothing more." But the quiet room offered too much space for old memories. Memories of him playing late into the night, while someone he loved listened from the doorway. Memories of his daughter clapping with tiny hands when she heard a melody she liked. Memories of dreams he once carried fearlessly. He closed his eyes, and before he could stop himself, he pressed a single key dot. The note rang out, soft and gentle, drifting across the empty room. His chest tightened. Not from sadness at least, not only from sadness, but from recognition. This wasn't just a piano. This was a piece of him he had locked away for years. He pressed another key, then a third. The sound was uneven at first, like someone learning again after a long break. But the more he touched the keys, the more his fingers remembered. They moved tentatively, reconnecting with old patterns. A small part of a melody formed one he used to play when his daughter was just a toddler. He didn't realize someone had returned to the stage area. A judge had come in early, checking something on the clipboard. She paused at the doorway when she heard the soft notes floating through the room. She stayed still, listening. He continued playing, unaware he had an audience. His fingers moved delicately, pulling out a gentle tune from somewhere deep inside him. The music wasn't perfect, but it held truth. It held years of silence, loss, love, and resilience. When he reached the end of the simple melody, he stopped. He took a shaky breath and stood quickly, embarrassed by what he had done. He thought no one had heard, but the judge at the door had, tears in her eyes. She didn't step forward yet. She didn't want to scare him or make him feel exposed. Instead, she quietly stepped back into the hallway, letting him have the moment to himself. He closed the piano cover, his hands trembling lightly. He told himself it was just a moment of weakness. Nothing important. Nothing anyone would remember. But that wasn't true. Something important had shifted in the air. He gathered his cleaning cloth and headed off the stage, unaware that this small, private moment, this brief return to music, was only the beginning. Life had been waiting patiently for this single spark, and soon everything would change because of it. The morning sun reached through the thin curtains and slowly filled the small apartment with a soft, warm light. He woke up before the alarm again, something that had become a habit ever since life had pushed him into a routine where every minute mattered. For a moment, he stayed still, listening to the quiet breathing from the other room. That sound alone gave him strength, even when he was tired down to his bones. He got out of bed and stretched his back, trying to release the stiffness from another long night of thinking too much. The kettle clicked on in the kitchen as he prepared breakfast, moving gently so he wouldn't wake the child just yet. It was their small moment of peace before the day began, before school, before work, before responsibilities filled every space dot as he placed 2 slices of bread in the toaster. He glanced at the kitchen counter where a stack of papers lay. Some were bills, some were forms from school, and others were reminders he kept writing for himself. Each paper carried weight, but he had learned how to breathe through it. Life didn't give him much room to complain. He had someone counting on him. When he walked toward the bedroom, he saw the small figure curled under a blanket, hair messy and peaceful. He smiled automatically. "Time to wake up," he whispered softly. A sleepy groan was the first response, followed by the child slowly sitting up and rubbing their eyes. "I'm so tired," the child mumbled. "I know," he said with a gentle laugh. "But we'll get through the day, one step at a time." The child nodded and slid out of bed. He helped them get ready, tying shoelaces and brushing hair that never seemed to stay in place. These tiny tasks were exhausting on some days, but also comforting. They reminded him he wasn't alone in this world. Over breakfast, the child spoke between small bites of toast. "We're practicing for the school show today. I think I want to try again. Are you sure?" he asked, careful not to push. "Only if you feel comfortable." The child took a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I think I'm ready." He felt a quiet pride. The last time had been too overwhelming for the child, and they had walked off the stage halfway through practice. Seeing them willing to try again made his chest warm. After breakfast, they stepped out. The hall had a strange quietness that afternoon, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath for a moment. The crew had stepped outside for a short break, leaving the wide stage empty. Only a few scattered echoing sounds drifted from the far end of the building, distant footsteps, a tap of metal, a door closing. He stayed behind, sweeping the stage slowly, wanting to finish the last bit of work before everyone returned. It was one of those small goals he set for himself every day, not because anyone demanded it, but because it made him feel calm. The piano stood at the center of the stage, its glossy surface reflecting the bright lights above. He always walked around it carefully, almost respectfully, as if it was a sleeping creature. For years, he avoided touching it more than necessary, afraid of what old memories it might wake inside him. But that day, something felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the exhaustion that made his defenses weaker. Or maybe it was the way one of the keys shone under the light, almost calling to him. He tried not to look at it, continued sweeping, moved the mop bucket, fixed a chair, but his eyes kept drifting back to the piano. Before he realized it, he walked closer and placed both hands gently on the edge of the instrument. It felt warm from the lights above. He lifted the key cover slowly, letting it fall back softly so it wouldn't make noise. His fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, not touching them yet. It had been so long that his own hands almost felt like strangers. He looked around to make sure no one was nearby. The stage door was still closed. The hallway was quiet. Even the usual buzzing of conversation from the dressing rooms had faded. It felt like he was alone in a small world for just a little while. He pressed one key. A soft note filled the empty hall. It floated gently, echoing around him like a voice he had not heard in years. A warm, familiar ache spread across his chest. He closed his eyes for a second and let the sound settle. He lifted his hand again, but this time both hands slowly rested on the keys. He wasn't planning to play anything, not really. He only wanted to feel the instrument again. But his fingers moved almost on their own, as if something inside him remembered the path. A few simple notes came out, then a short melody. He played so lightly, it felt like he was whispering through the piano. He paused again, almost afraid of where this might lead. But the quiet around him felt safe, like it was giving him permission, and then he started to play. It wasn't a loud or impressive performance. It was slow, gentle, full of emotion he never talked about. Every note felt like it carried a memory, some painful, some beautiful, some forgotten for too long. His shoulders relaxed, and his breathing became calmer. The stress he carried every day seemed to melt with each passing moment. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on the keys as if they were guiding him. The melody shifted into something deeper, something personal, something he had once written during long nights when life felt unbearably heavy. He had not touched that piece in years, yet somehow it came back to him perfectly. He didn't notice the door opening at first. Only one of the judges stepped inside. The man froze when he heard the music, surprised to see the quiet stage cleaner sitting at the piano. He expected to see a student or performer rehearsing, not the person usually seen carrying tools and wiping spilled paint off the floor. The judge stayed near the doorway, not wanting to disturb him. His eyes softened as he listened. There was something raw in the notes, something honest that none of the rehearsals earlier had managed to express. A moment later, 2 more judges walked in from the hallway. They began speaking loudly to each other, but stopped as soon as the music reached them. The first judge placed a finger over his lips, silently asking them to stay quiet. They stepped closer, their expressions slowly changing from confusion to awe. One of the performers, returning early from the break, peeked into the hall and almost walked away, thinking she had entered the wrong room. When she realized who was playing, her mouth fell slightly open in surprise. She stood by the wall and listened, feeling a strange emotion rise inside her. Others followed, one by one, drawn by the softness of the music. He still had no idea anyone was watching. His head was slightly bowed, his fingers moving with gentle certainty. His mind wandered through old memories, days when music filled his home, nights when he played for someone he loved, moments with his daughter when she tried to copy his hand movements on an old keyboard dot. It felt like stepping back into a world he had once locked away. The group watching him grew quietly. Some held their breath without realizing it. Some felt tears forming for reasons they couldn't explain. There was something about the way he played simple, unforced, full of feeling that made the room feel heavier. Like everyone was part of a moment that shouldn't be interrupted. His final notes drifted into silence. They faded slowly, like a candle burning down to its last glow. He let his hands rest on the keys for a moment before pulling them back. His shoulders rose and fell with a quiet sigh. He didn't open his eyes right away, wanting to memorize the feeling before it disappeared again. When he finally looked up, he froze. A group of people stood around the stage, staring at him in complete silence. His face turned red instantly. His heart raced. He stood up so fast that the piano bench slid back a little. He muttered a quick apology, embarrassed and unsure what else to say. He hadn't meant for anyone to hear him. He thought he was alone. He felt like he had broken some invisible rule, but none of them looked upset. In fact, their eyes were filled with something he didn't expect: admiration. One of the judges stepped forward and said softly, "Don't apologize." That was something special. He shook his head, trying to find words, but nothing came out. He didn't know how to handle compliments. He didn't think he deserved any. He was used to being invisible. The judge took a step closer, his voice calm and sincere. "Why didn't you tell us you could play like that?" His throat tightened. He didn't want to talk about the past in front of so many people. So he simply said, "It's been a long time." Another judge smiled gently. "Well, it doesn't sound like it." A performer wiped her eyes, trying not to make it obvious. Someone else whispered that they had never heard anything so full of emotion. People began walking closer to the stage, wanting to thank him, wanting to tell him how deeply the music touched them. He stepped back a little, overwhelmed, not used to being the center of attention. He wasn't sure what to do or where to look. His hands trembled slightly. All he had done was play for a few minutes, something he once loved but had hidden for so long. Yet somehow, those few minutes had changed the room. He looked at the piano again, unsure whether he should close the cover or walk away. But before he could make a move, someone said quietly, "Please don't stop." And for the first time in many years, he felt something waking inside him, something he thought he had lost forever, a small, fragile hope. The hall stayed completely still for a moment, as if everyone inside was trying to understand what they had just witnessed. He stood by the piano, unsure whether he should step away or stay where he was. His heartbeat was loud in his ears, and he wished he could disappear into the floor. He wasn't used to people staring at him like this, especially not with so much emotion in their eyes. One of the judges walked closer, speaking softly as if he was afraid to break the fragile atmosphere. "I don't think anyone here expected that," he said. There was no hint of mockery in his voice, only genuine surprise. The single dad lowered his gaze. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he murmured. "I was just cleaning. I didn't know anyone was here." "You weren't interrupting anything," the judge replied gently. "You gave us something we didn't even know we needed today." More people stepped forward, each of them wearing the same expression, something between amazement and admiration. Some performers looked almost shaken, as if the music had reached a place inside them they didn't expect. A few wiped their eyes quietly, hoping no one noticed. A young performer spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. "That was beautiful. I don't think I've ever heard something that honest before. It felt like a story." He didn't know what to say. Compliments were not something he received often. He worked behind the scenes, where nobody paid attention unless something went wrong. He wasn't used to being praised. The sudden attention felt almost too heavy. He stepped back from the piano cautiously. "I'm sorry if it troubled anyone," he whispered. His instinct was always to apologize. Even when he hadn't done anything wrong, another judge shook his head. "You have nothing to be sorry for." That was the most heartfelt performance we've heard today. The single dad swallowed hard. He didn't know how to respond to such kindness. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a rush of emotions he had kept buried for too long. The piano piece he played had come straight from a place deep inside him, a place he rarely visited. One of the crew members stepped closer, still wiping her eyes. "I didn't even know you played," she said softly. "You're always so quiet." He nodded a little. "It's been a long time since I played for anyone." Someone asked, "Why'd you stop?" He opened his mouth, but closed it again, explaining his past, his struggles, the sacrifices he had made for his daughter. It wasn't easy. Those memories were private, painful, and tangled in loss. He didn't know how much he should share with a room full of people. Finally, he said, "Life happened." And when it did, music slowly slipped away. The room stayed silent for a moment. One of the older judges nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he let on. "Sometimes life gets in the way of the things we love," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean they are gone forever." The single dad didn't answer. He looked at the piano again, feeling a mix of longing and fear. Playing just now had opened something inside him, a door he had closed years ago. It felt good, but it also scared him. Music had once been everything to him, but it had also reminded him of the hardest time in his life. A performer stepped forward, her voice breaking the quiet. "Can you play something else?" she asked hesitantly. Her question surprised him. He had not expected anyone to want more. He looked around, feeling overwhelmed. All eyes were on him again. The room was filled with a soft anticipation, like everyone was waiting for something fragile and important. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It's been so long." But the judge who had spoken earlier encouraged him. "You don't have to play anything complicated. Just whatever your heart feels ready for." The single dad stood still for a long moment. Then, almost without realizing it, he walked back to the piano. The bench felt familiar under him, like greeting an old friend after years of distance. He placed his hands gently on the keys again. The room fell into complete silence. This time, he didn't play one of his old pieces. He simply let his fingers drift into a soft, improvised melody. It was slow, almost hesitant at first, like he was searching through forgotten memories. Then it grew warmer, fuller, more confident. The judges watched in awe. The performers held their breath. Even the crew members who had been rushing to finish tasks earlier now stood frozen, afraid to miss a single note. His music filled the hall again, but this time it felt different, lighter, more freeing. It felt like someone opening a window after years of keeping it shut. He wasn't playing from sadness anymore. He was playing from hope. The notes formed a gentle rhythm that reminded him of quiet mornings with his daughter, of laughter, of the moments that gave him strength. His fingers moved with a calm confidence he didn't know he still had. He didn't think, he simply played. When he finished, the silence lingered again longer than before. Then a soft clap echoed in the hall. Another followed. And another. Soon the whole room applauded, not loudly but warmly, like they were afraid to break the delicate beauty of the moment. Their eyes shone with respect and gratitude. The single dad looked down, embarrassed but also deeply touched. He didn't know how to handle so much appreciation. It had been years since he felt seen by anyone. A judge walked closer and spoke gently. "I think you should consider performing in the actual event." He blinked, startled. "Me? No. I'm not." He gestured helplessly toward the stage, the lights, the equipment. "I'm not one of the performers. I just clean up. That's my job." "Maybe," the judge said kindly, "but that doesn't mean it's the only thing you're meant to do." A crew member nodded. "You belong on that stage more than anyone." One of the performers added quietly, "Your music has more heart than all our rehearsed pieces combined." Their words hit him deeply. They were kind, sincere, and unexpected. But they also scared him. He had spent so many years hiding his talent, convincing himself he wasn't meant for anything beyond surviving day by day. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "It's been so long since I performed. I'm out of practice. And I have responsibilities. My daughter, my work. It's not easy." Another judge stepped closer. "We're not asking you to prove anything. We're giving you a chance to remember who you truly are." His throat tightened. No one had spoken to him like that in years. The performers exchanged looks, silently agreeing with the judges. They knew what they had heard was something rare music that came from real emotion, not technical perfection. One performer said softly, "You don't have to decide now. But please, don't shut the door on yourself." He looked at the piano once more. The keys reflected the overhead lights, waiting quietly. He could feel his heart pulling him toward the idea of performing again, but fear held him back. More people began speaking, sharing how his playing made them feel, how calming it was, how moving, how honest. Their words felt like gentle hands lifting him up, giving him courage. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost: belonging. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Instead, he whispered softly, almost more to himself than to anyone else, "I'll think about it." The room broke into warm smiles. No pressure, no judgment, just quiet support. As he stepped back from the piano, someone placed a hand on his shoulder, light, reassuring, and in that moment, he felt something new growing inside him. A small spark, a spark of possibility, a spark of courage, a spark that made him wonder. Maybe this wasn't the end of his music. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. The next morning started like any other for him, yet something felt different in the air. He woke up early, prepared breakfast for his daughter, and packed her lunch with the same quiet care he always showed. She sat at the small table, swinging her legs and humming softly one of the melodies he had played the day before, without realizing she had heard it before. He paused for a second while pouring tea. "Where did you learn that tune?" he asked gently. She shrugged with a small smile. "It's the one you used to play when I was little. I remember it." Her words softened him. That melody had been part of the happiest moments of his life, long before his responsibilities became heavy. Hearing her hum it now felt like a piece of the past returning to him. He gave her a warm smile, but inside he felt a small pull, like something was encouraging him forward. After dropping her at school, he walked toward the community hall with slow steps. The memory of yesterday played in his mind over and over, how people had stopped to listen, the way their expressions had changed, the applause that felt almost unreal. Even now, the idea that anyone had admired his playing still felt strange. He pushed open the hall doors, expecting the usual quiet morning routine. But the moment he stepped inside, a few crew members turned toward him with kind smiles. "Morning," one of them said softly. Another added, "We were just talking about your music yesterday." He nodded awkwardly, unsure how to react. Compliments made him nervous, but their smiles were warm, not heavy or demanding. It made him feel less pressured. He went straight to his work, setting up chairs, cleaning the stage edges, and checking cables like he always did. But he noticed people watching him from time to time, not in a strange way, but with a kind of gentle respect he wasn't used to. Around midday, one of the judges approached him again. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. He hesitated, but nodded. They stood near the stage steps, while others worked in the background. The judge spoke calmly. "I didn't want to rush you yesterday, but I wanted you to know the offer still stands. We'd love for you to perform." He shook his head lightly. "I don't know if I'm ready. I haven't performed in years." "That doesn't matter," the judge said kindly. "You have something rare emotion. People connect with that more than perfect notes." He lowered his eyes. "I'm just a worker here. I'm not supposed to be in the spotlight." The judge smiled gently. Sometimes the right person for the spotlight is the one who never asked for it. Those words stayed with him long after the judge walked away. They settled in his chest like a quiet warmth. Still, fear kept tugging at him from the inside. What if he failed? What if people expected too much? What if he disappointed his daughter? Later that afternoon, when the hall became quieter again, he walked toward the piano without thinking. He sat down slowly, letting his fingers rest on the keys. He didn't play anything, not yet. He just sat there, feeling the cool smoothness beneath his hands. Memories rose late nights, practicing until his eyes burned. His partner leaning against the doorframe, smiling softly at him. Their daughter sleeping peacefully on the couch, while he played gentle songs to keep the house filled with warmth. Life had taken so much from him, but music had always been the part he kept safe in his heart. He pressed a single key, and its sound echoed faintly across the empty hall. He didn't notice someone standing behind him. "Dad?" He turned quickly. His daughter had entered the hall, holding the small lunchbox he had forgotten to take back home. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him at the piano. "You're playing again," she said softly. He smiled, shy and warm. "Just thinking." She walked closer and placed the lunchbox on the stage. "Everyone at school said you played in front of people yesterday. Is it true?" He chuckled gently. "Well, I didn't mean to. They just heard me practicing." She sat on the bench beside him, her small shoulder pressing lightly against his arm. "I think you should play in the show," she said with simple confidence. Her words surprised him. "You do?" She nodded. "You always look happy when you play, even when you try to hide it." He swallowed, touched more deeply than he could express. She wasn't saying it to push him. She was saying it because she understood him, even as a child. The hall door opened again. The judge stepped inside, giving them a polite nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The single dad shook his head. The judge knelt slightly to speak to the little girl. "Your dad is very talented," he said kindly. "We'd be honored to have him perform." She looked up at her father with hopeful eyes. "Please try. Just once." For me, her request was gentle, not demanding. But something in her expression touched him deeply. The trust she had in him, the belief that he could be more than he thought. He took a slow breath and looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Finally, He nodded. "All right," he whispered. "I'll try." His daughter broke into a bright smile and hugged him tightly. The judge smiled warmly. "Thank you. We'll help with everything you need." He didn't know what performing again would bring, but in that moment, surrounded by quiet support and his daughter's unwavering belief, he felt something shift inside him, like a heavy door opening after years of being locked out over the next few days. He practiced whenever he had spare time. He played softly in the mornings, during breaks, and late at night after tucking his daughter into bed. At first, his fingers stumbled slightly, unused to long hours at the piano. But slowly the old confidence returned. The hall crew watched him sometimes, clapping softly after he finished a piece. Performers asked him questions. How did you learn? How long have you played? How did he create such emotional melodies? He answered shyly but honestly. Their curiosity made him feel welcomed, not judged. The night of the event arrived sooner than he expected. The hall was filled with people, families, friends, neighbors, teachers, small children sitting on their parents' laps. The warm hum of conversation filled the air. Backstage, he felt nervous, his hands cold despite the lights. He wasn't used to standing in the wings waiting for his turn. But his daughter held his hand tightly. "You'll do great," she whispered. When his name was announced, he stepped out into the lights. The audience turned toward him, some curious, some surprised to see the quiet worker now standing center stage. He sat at the piano, took a slow breath, and let the room grow silent. Then he began to play. The first note was soft, like a gentle whisper. The next carried warmth. Soon the hall was filled with a melody that felt like a story, his story full of loss, love, struggle, and hope. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply opened his heart. People leaned forward, drawn into the emotional simplicity of his playing. Some closed their eyes. Some wiped tears quietly. Even the restless children grew still. When he played the final note, it lingered in the air before fading into silence. The hall erupted into applause. Warm, loud, sincere applause. He lifted his head slowly, stunned. His daughter stood near the front, clapping with the biggest smile he had ever seen. A wave of emotion washed over him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was hiding. After the performance, people approached him, thanking him, praising him, telling him how much the music touched their hearts. But the moment that meant the most was when his daughter hugged him tightly and whispered, "I'm proud of you." He closed his eyes, feeling tears gather. Those simple words meant more than any applause got in the days that followed. The community continued to talk about his performance. Some asked if he would teach. Others invited him to small events. A few even suggested recording his music. He didn't know where this new path would lead him. But for the first time in a long time, he felt excited about the future, not for fame, not for attention, but for the joy of sharing something he loved. And every evening, after finishing work, he and his daughter would sit by the piano. He would play softly, and she would hum along. Music had returned to his life, not as a dream he had lost, but as a new beginning.